Greetings, everyone. Welcome to True Health Live. We are at, guess what, episode 20. Who knew we was going to make it? It's the song, we make it this far. Can we just talk? That was bad. It's the dawning and the singer in the dining. But you know the song I'm talking about. So we're at episode 20 and we are just going to talk. There's a lot of things that have been happening on, just everywhere, and especially on the public health front. We know that the pandemic ushered in this realization of public health, right? And that's all that's been on like the lips of everybody, in addition to like all the wars that have popped up, violence in, different countries and what have you. On the internet, they're talking about all sorts of things. People have just like been going stir crazy, and some have just plainly lost their minds. So we're going to try to have a little bit of sanity and, discuss some of the things that have been going on. And what we want to kind of talk about is, what's on everybody's mind and everybody's lips as the country and cities are reopening, right? People are returning to work. And that's what's happening with vaccines, right? So we know that reports are showing that a little over 60% of the US population is vaccinated. And we know that like when people are returning to work, there have been so many mandates passed down. So what we want to really go over is like, how are people feeling about that? What have we seen? Some people are for it, some people are against it. What do we think about, some of the divisiveness that it's caused? How do we kind of figure out how to bridge a gap and come back together and kind of like make sense of everything? There's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. How do we kind of take a step back and say, okay, this is what we need to do? So I'm interested in hearing what you ladies have to say about it. First, I guess it's like, do we think that like these numbers like mean anything? Like, we know over half the country, but we still see these reports of people are just like, and some of it is a mixture of like, maybe some people are misinformed, but I do think that there's a lot of people who are not misinformed. They're very informed, but they're just making a conscious decision to say, I don't think that's right for my body. And I do think that as public health people in the public health world, that's merited. We know that homeopathic and naturopathic medicine is real, and alternative methods are real. And if people have figured out how to stay healthy, then maybe there's, some room to take a step back and look at that. And we say, okay, how do we kind of make a space for this group of people? So that's kind of like my intro and what I think about it. There's more. But
I would actually love to jump in because when I was listening to what you just shared, the idea of informed consent, being particularly in the field of behavioral health, right? Talking about mental health, a psychiatric hospital, there is oftentimes an area within mental health care that is not considered by the greater population, which is treatment over objection. Right? Many don't recognize that because if you decide, oh, I'm going to have this tumor removed, yes, no, maybe so, you elect for surgery, it's your choice. But there is something called treatment over objection, right? And then there is a process of informed consent. And I know that a lot of the folks that are informed and making informed decisions, whether they're making informed decisions to be vaccinated or to not, because we're really not, picking a side here. I think that oftentimes the question for those who are choosing to abstain is their right to make an informed decision being encroached upon by the laws of the land, by their employer? And so when you think about mental health care, there is a strict criteria by which we have to argue the case in court to say, Deidre requires treatment over objection, or Deidre requires to be involuntarily retained by the hospital for the safety of herself or of her community. Because if she does not live here with us and receive treatment, these are the things that she's been known to do in the community, for example. I don't think that argument has been appropriately made for the widespread like requirement for vaccination. Like I don't think those that are choosing to abstain feel supported, you know, as it pertains to informed consent. So it's important that people dig into that, right? We give nuggets, but it's up to you all to research and know what these terms mean and how they apply to you. Um, so that was the first thing that came to mind, is like what that process is, being an informed consumer.
I think, piggybacking off what Precious also said in terms of the informed consent and the mental health aspect, I think a lot of people have been through, have a history of trauma. And there's an element of these kind of mandates that kind of can feed into that, trauma that they're potentially not healed 100% from, can exacerbate that. So I think we're dealing with, following on what you said, Deirdre, in terms of we're living in an environment of fear. I mean, throughout the pandemic, it's been jumping from one panic to the next. And, there's always something new that crops up. But I think this currently where we stand now, I think when it comes to mental health, this is something that, is becoming, at the forefront, something, an issue when it comes to when we look at public health, be it children, young people, older people. It's just, fear regarding how to navigate this pandemic, how to deal with, new traumas that are emerging, based off of old traumas, and just, yeah, just a confusion, generally speaking, when it comes to kind of how to move forward. Is there hope for the future? What's going to happen, essentially. So yeah.
Those are all valid points. And authentically speaking, I'm just fed up. Like most people, I'm just like, people have the right to make the decision for themselves and say what can and cannot go into their body, what they're comfortable with, what they're not. I've heard so I've gotten so much feedback from, like, colleagues and friends and family, community members. Um, and it's just terrible. It's a terrible predicament to be in. And you have families that are really faced with these life altering decisions. It's like, I don't want to do this, but if I don't do it, I'm going to lose my job. And what do you do if you're the only breadwinner? Like, if you're the only income in this household, what do you do? So a lot of people are making this sacrifice to be, experimented on. Um, and because they want their family to survive. It's like survival, right? And so they're doing something, they're going against what they believe because the employer has now mandated this. And if they don't do it, they lose their income. How do they survive? How do they take care of their family? It's heartbreaking. It's the toll it takes on your mental and emotional well-being is horrendous. It's very and I can only imagine for those healthcare workers, frontliners, who worked the entire time, were keeping things going, treating people, the nurses, doctors, everyone on the front lines who wrote this thing out and did all they could to help people and keep people alive, that do not want the vaccine, who are still here without the vaccine, throughout that period of time, and now are being told, well, if you don't do it, we have to let you go, or we're going to lay you we're going to suspend you for 30 days without any pay or anything, and we'll revisit the conversation to see how you feel, and if you still don't want it, then we'll have to let you go. Like, wait, what? I
Mm-hmm.
saved all these lives, I contributed and worked and put my life in jeopardy because this is the oath I took, and you're telling me because I don't want to take this vaccine, you're going to let me go? Like, that to me, just it's beyond unfair. It's beyond unfair. And I think, like, employers need to really think about that. And also, folks who are against the vaccine need to come together. Like you said, Precious, do the research, right? We may give information, but do your research, have the solid information, the facts, come together and protest it. If it's 100 people in the organization and 60 of you are saying we don't want this, and you go against what that policy is or what they're trying to in place, they're going to have to rethink that decision, because as a business, 60% of your employees being laid off, or you letting them go, is not feasible, right? Especially if you're in healthcare, if you're providing a service to the community. to the community that is needed. So I think too, we have to also realize the power we have. And again, I'm pro-choice. If you choose to make the decision to take the vaccine, that is totally up to you. And if you choose not to, that is also totally up to you. And you should not be shunned and you should not be shamed about the decisions that you make, because to each is his own, right? But I really believe we can't just sit back and do nothing. If you can't just sit there, talk about it, be angry about it, and like cry about it. You have to do something. And for those who feel like they don't have a voice, you do. You just have to muster up the courage, ask questions, even if you don't want to be the one at the forefront. Ask questions, get together with other folks and work as a community, work together to figure something out, and show up to those town halls, show up to those meetings with your employer, voice the opinions you have at that point, because that's why they created them. I know my employer has town halls all the time, and I'm like, twiddle fingers. My daughter says I'm asking tons of questions, because it's like, if you sit there and you don't ask, then how would you know? And if you don't challenge them, then it's like they just do what they want to do. And one thing I want to point out, we're in New York, right? We live in New York and we hustle, and there's always a way around something. And so people are finding ways around things, around this per se, right? And it's just like when you force somebody to do something, just like when you tell them no, don't do that, what are they going to do? They're going to do it anyway, right? So you're telling me I have to do something I don't want to do. I'm going to find a way to still stay true to me. And here, go ahead, do this, because I want to take this if it satisfies what you want. But I'm going to protect myself and stay true to who I am. And I'm going to do what I need to do for my family. And when I am ready to cut ties, I will do it in my terms.
Right.
We're finding ways.
I think that you kind of took it full circle, right? Because you started by saying, I'm fed up, which what I wrote down, I jot a lot. I think y'all know that. So I write down like words. So powerless came to mind, right? And I'm like, yeah, that is like, as much as I feel like I'm taking control as best I can, there is a sense just on television when I speak to staff, just my neighbors, there is a sense of powerlessness, right? Or a question of, well, how much control do I really have over my choices for my children and for my family and myself? And I think the sad reality of what living in the home of the free and the brave actually represents to many of us, right? But with that, because I don't want us to kind of revel in that, right? The trauma and that powerlessness, because I think the resilience comes from hope and from solidarity. So I think, kudos, Anushka, because you really did take it from fed up, powerless to hope and coming together. And with that, there are ways to fuel, like to kind of flip that trauma response and use the it's almost like it's like a historical reminder. Like you cringe because it's like, you recognize that something about this reminds you of something else. So it's like, you know what, now you have an opportunity to do something about that trauma that you might not have been able to. You might not have been a staunch advocate for yourself the last time, but this time you can. And because we do strive to have a balanced discussion, I do want to say that running a hospital, it is very challenging to make the right decisions or to know that you're making the right decision for the organization. Because you have many, many people that you want to be sure that everyone is safe. And if you're told that this vaccine, this process can ensure the safety, then that's what you want to go with. And I think many employers and municipalities may believe that that's the case, right? That this is all we have, so we're going to push all we have. But I think oftentimes we have to kind of take the blinders off and not have a myopic view of things. We often talk about the allopathic versus the homeopathic approach and perspective. We do know that there are countries that have taken a more naturopathic approach to dealing with the coronavirus. And I don't think that that's really widely shared in the West. And I see Alia, fervently nodding her head. I think that that's an important discussion for the powers that be to have, or as Anushka said, for those who are informed to come together and say, well, listen, we have been showing up and we haven't been sick. And, but maybe our lifestyle is very different, and what we eat and how we manage stress is just different. So therefore, guess what? The virus didn't just accidentally miss us. We weren't a good host. We weren't good incubators for said virus. So there's that, there's a lot to examine. But some employers, I think, are just really required by their funding sources to do what they now must do. And it's an unfortunate predicament for all.
Oh, excuse my big fingers. But I was just agreeing. I was like, yeah, like, some of it is, especially like in the nonprofit world, these are mandates coming out by like the cities and the states, and they are mandating that their employees and subsequently like contractors, these are the rules. So a lot of the times it's not necessarily the employer saying like, well, we want to do this. It's like they're kind of being pushed or backed into a corner because it matters, because this is, their bread. This is how, the organization stays running. And then what happens is it's like, well, should we, just kind of fall in line and do this? It's a mixture of like, well, we should fall in line and just do it for everybody, because then you'll have a mixture of employees in the organization. Well, you're funded by this group, and you're funded by that group, so you guys have to do this, and you guys, and so then it becomes, well, why do they have to do it? People then do want like uniformity. So it's like, well, if we have to do it based on what's being sent down by a particular funder or funders, we may as well just make like a blanket for everyone, because it's not going to work to where we do it for some and do it for others. Then there is also the fear that's mixed in, because they're made up of people, right? And so it's like, yeah, well, but I think this should happen, and I get that when people are afraid, these are the things that happen. And that's why I said at the same time, like, if we're in public health, we have to widen the lens. That's what public health is. It's very broad. So that means that the strategies, and then the tactics of which we do things have to reflect that broadness of what the field is. We have to like take into account everything. And, yes, it has to stay evidence-based. I won't like, kind of move away from that. It has to stay evidence-based. So then it takes us back to making sure that when we're talking about research, that it includes a lot of research. Because then what happens is you have the people who are like, well, I believe in modern medicine. I do too. I don't expect to, patch up a gaping wound with a leaf, and that's just like, very dramatic. But like, I do too, because there are some things that, modern medicine will do it quicker and easier. But if there is something that works and it's not been proven that it doesn't work, then maybe we should look into that a little bit more. Maybe more funding should go to those things. So we do, like you said, Precious, like we can have more news outlets opening up to what's actually being done in other countries, and not all the mainstream things. Because the other thing on a lot of mainstream, it can be really confusing. And I'm sitting here as a public health person who has, experience in research and reading documents. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? I thought yesterday you said this, And so if I'm sitting here confused, what is that doing for the regular person who does not do, research for a living every day? It's confusing, In one moment, if you're saying that, that the rate of transmission is about the same for both who have been, have received a shot versus those who have not. But then say like, well, everybody who's propagating are the ones who haven't received it. That's confusing. It's double speak. So it's like, let's have one unified message so that, people are not confused. Give them the correct information so then they can, say, okay, well, I understand this. I'm going to either do it or I'm going to not. They decide not to, don't, ostracize them, or don't like alienate them and then make them feel bad. I mean, you have the power over how you feel. But you know what I mean? It's like, you know, if I make a decision and it might be against everyone else, I'm like, oh, this is a decision.
But you know what? And it's so funny because I feel like I have daily conversation about this. So y'all have to forgive me today. But I think it's really an unfortunate predicament for everyone to be in, for all of us to be in. And I'm going to use the example of um, the reluctant voluntary person. So you were reluctant, you weren't sure about taking the vaccine, pre-employer requirement, you took it anyway, you know, due to maybe family pressure, societal pressure, because the pressure is on and it's really intense for those who are identified as abstaining, right? There's almost like a stigma, or dare I say a scarlet letter, kind of being brandished on anyone who decides to not take this vaccine. So let's just follow that thread. So there's someone, they're reluctant, but they do it because they think it's the best thing to do. They subject their body to whatever this is, and they take let's say they went with Moderna. Well, let's say they went with, Moderna. So they take 2 shots, right? But now there's talk of the need for a booster. Yes, right now they're saying it's primarily for those who have compromised predicaments, but there's also discussion that there's a question about what the efficacy and how long, those who have taken those first set of doses will really be. And I don't have the technical lingo, so I'm going to pivot to Alia. Oh, you're over here. To Alia in a moment. But the concern is that right now, the average New Yorker who can go to restaurants because they're vaccinated and who can go to museums and all of these, I guess, cool things that you now have the privilege of participating in, it's important that you recognize that if you've taken the stance that you don't want to take any more vaccines, when the booster becomes mandatory, you will be considered not fully vaccinated. And I don't know that everyone understands that this is going to continue and continue and continue. So with that, I'm going to mute out because I see Alia is ready.
So I have a lot to say, and basically I'm not entirely sure how to start, but going back onto what you said, Deirdre, in terms of, public health being a broad kind of, we need to apply public health in a broad fashion. I don't think it's so straightforward and black and white as that, because in some instances we need to be, function as a collective kind of society. But in many instances as well, we need to kind of be kind of focused on what benefits the individual, because everyone's different. And I think that's, one of the things that we are kind of lacking, that nuance, that sort of, what's good for one may not be good for someone else. And we need to kind of stratify the population based on, risk benefit. And I think this is something that risk benefit is becoming so skewed because, everyone thinks that, we're doing this for the greater good. But in actual fact, not necessarily, because, the benefits may, in a certain population, the benefits might outweigh the risks, whereas in another population, the risks may outweigh the benefits. So I think it's a very lazy way, I would say, to kind of view everyone as, I mean, we are all in this together. That's not to say, the unity is important. But I think we also need to understand that we are human beings and we're all very different and come from very different backgrounds. And like you say, some people health-wise are a lot better than other people. For example, when it comes to metabolic health, it works in both ways. Somebody that's obese, for example, we already know that's a comorbidity for getting a bad case of COVID. We also know that you can't, metabolic health, it doesn't mean that you're thin, you're technically healthy per se either. So these are things that require time. It require a lot of research to kind of delve into and look at comprehensively. At the moment, I think we're just applying this very broad brush stroke onto everyone, which is really unfair. It's inequitable. And to be honest and frank, it's affecting minorities more than anyone. because these people are the people that don't have a choice when it comes to losing a job. They don't have the funds. They're not financially in a position to be like, okay, it's okay, I can be laid off, you know? So for them, it's for me, kind of trying to comprehend what they must be going through it must be ridiculously traumatic. And I think the difficulty, like you say, is we still need to remain hopeful and positive regardless. And, you know, again, coming together and knowing that there are people who are in similar positions, I think is really, really kind of, it helps promote that positivity, that we're not alone, because I think that's the messaging, what the messaging is kind of, you know, it's achieving at this point where people are thinking, oh God, we know we're alone. We don't have anyone, no one else is going through this. You know, other people are enjoying the public spaces that we're potentially being restricted to. When in actual fact, there are more people who are probably feeling the same way. And I think having that, you know, acknowledging that, knowing that can just give you a little bit of, you know, a positivity boost amidst all this kind of fear and panic. Precious, also just, you know, going off on what you said in terms of, I think you said that, you know, the duration of the immunity in terms of vaccinated versus, we haven't mentioned this, but the natural immunity as well for those people, a number of people, a great deal, you know, we're talking about a great number here who have, been survived, you know, COVID, have natural immunity. And the interesting thing is, going through the papers, scientific papers, over and over again, and it's no surprise that, you know, natural immunity seems to be, you know, the case for natural immunity is very strong. You know, people that have recovered may in fact have more durable immunity than those who are double vaxxed. So those people are also being, you know, pushed aside, not being acknowledged. What about them? Are we potentially doing harm by, you know, giving them extra, they now, I think the headlines were, you're superhuman, or you have superpowers, super immunity, you know. I think, yeah, we're not looking at this in a very comprehensive way. I understand the fear, the panic, the fact that, you know, losing one life, you know, it's not, we can't just, you know, say, oh, it's okay if we lose one life or two life. It's a very difficult kind of situation to navigate because there are people that definitely would benefit from getting vaccinated. So it's about, I think, going back to stratifying the population, informing people and encouraging people to really assess the risk benefit, but also giving them that choice. You know, I'm also pro-choice, and that's really important, especially now that we're entering into the realm of, you know, vaccinating children. It's a very slippery slope. It's a very, you know, scary kind of terrain to kind of be navigating as parents. You know, as a new parent myself, I probably wouldn't have acknowledged how, you know, difficult and challenging it is. But now I'm in, you know, sitting in that seat, I kind of appreciate that, you know, that's something that people must be really, you know, worrying about. The fact that as well, I think it's 12-year-olds and above also are restricted in terms of public spaces. Again, if, you know, a minority family need to kind of keep their children entertained, what do they do? Mental health comes back to that. Mental health issues, we're seeing that more and more in children. First, it was the Zoom kind of landscape that we're navigating in terms of schooling, etc. But now we're also navigating, you know, potentially not having access to public spaces, which is even worse. So yeah, lots to be said. But like you said, Deidre and Precious as well, you know, and Anushka as well, we need a lot more research when it comes to this. And of course, I think it's important to say, and just going to end it there, is that, you know, science is ever evolving. There's no one thing that we know now will potentially change moving forward. So we have to acknowledge that. And I think that makes it a little bit more, a lot more challenging in terms of how we adapt, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted to piggyback and come back to the mental health and the fear factor. So out of fear, like Aaliyah said, you know, people just want to try and save lives, right? So out of fear, it's like, well, we have this vaccine, it's gonna work, you know, let's everybody take it, right? Because the goal is to try to save a life. But then the piece that I feel that people are forgetting is when you force people to do something they don't want to do, what does that do to their mental health? Because if you're forcing someone to take this vaccine, a person of a minority, think about what that's doing to their mental and emotional being, right? That can drive them into suicidal thoughts because all they're thinking about is, I'm gonna lose this job, I cannot provide, but if I take this injection, I don't know what's to come. What is that going to do to me? So it's just the stress will cause illness, it'll cause them to break down. You don't know what kind of impact that does on a family, not just the individual but a family. So while you're trying to save a life because you're in fear of not to, what will happen if the people don't take the vaccine, but what about that same aspect of trying to save a life? What will happen? Well, the thought process, I'm trying to say this the right way. What's going to happen with those folks who are forced to take it and are taking in all this stress and all this worry, and it's going to lead to the same thing? Are you not in fear of losing the life then? Because it looks like you guys said, like we're all agreeing, it's a hard place to be in. It's a terrible predicament either way we turn. And so there's inequities everywhere, right? It might be great for some, for those people, for the people who are making these decisions, right? Like the funders that then pass it off to the employers who then put the pressure on the employee. It's like you have to think outside the box. It's human. Like it affects every human, not just one, not just a particular group. It's everybody, and we have to do something that it works for all of us, or at least have a how do you say, overall well intention, where you can say, okay, I want to do this because this is right for me. And if you say, I don't want to do this, I don't feel it's right for me or for my family, especially my youngsters, then I have the choice not to do that. But it's like fear, I feel that fear does not solve any problem. It doesn't solve any problem because it's, you're fearing, you're like, you're not thinking positively, you're not being optimistic, you're moving with the fact and the knowledge of like making up your mind to say, well, if I don't do this, this is going to happen, and that this is going to happen is a negative, right? Because it's driven through fear. But if you have a open mind and you're thinking outside the box and you're looking at different perspectives and having, profound conversations, profound conversations, and you're just, critical thinking, exercising that, you will probably find other solutions. Like, I'm one of those people, I have immunity, natural immunity. I recovered. And you're telling me if I put this vaccine inside of me, that's better than the natural one, like that my body has developed, like my body. You're telling me that's not good enough? That makes no sense to me, and that is those particular, the people that fit in that category. It is very important to bring that up and to talk about that and to do more research on that. And yes, the science is changing all the time, but some things are common sense. Right? Some things are just like, all right, this makes sense. We don't need to run all these exams and whatnot. Let's look into it deeper. Let's do more research on this and see what comes, what we can do here. But I'm
Yeah.
just concerned about that, the mental health piece, right? Because either way you go, people's lives are in jeopardy, their livelihoods, their families, their children. If my daughter was any younger, if she was under the age of 12, and then they decided to say, okay, well, those children have to get it, I would probably want to flee the states, because I'm like, no, that's just, it's scary. But I think we have to be brave, and we have to speak up and stand up for ourselves and for our beliefs, because if you do not, and you just succumb to what they say, then you're just going to follow suit, and whatever is to come, it's like you were part of that, right? So we have to take responsibility as well. And wherever our beliefs are, we stand up to that, and we stand true to ourselves, and keep pushing, keep asking the questions, keep showing up, keep showing out, in the most intellectual, and give pressure, be intellectual, speak with the knowledge that you have, and put pressure when needed, because sometimes people are like, okay, whatever, they won't take you seriously. But when they see that you're serious and you're like, no, we're going to do this and you're going to answer these questions and we're going to have this conversation and you're going to justify why you're telling me that I need to do X, Y, and Z. Where's the justification? Where's the proof? Where's the solid evidence? And so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, like a few things, like I get like, the whole point, what we know about public health is like, yeah, we want to prevent disease, promote health, and prolong life. And a lot of the times, and I had a guest on one of my other shows, and she said, the thing is like, they want the idea or the goal is to address the masses. So when you have like, oh, a small group over here, like they don't always get heard. At the same time, to your point, Alia, we know that science is ever evolving, and that's because people are always evolving. So we have to kind of go back and be like, okay, well, what doesn't work anymore? We have to be able to say like what has changed so that we can, augment the behavior for something that could be more amenable to the masses, right? Like there's always going to be the outliers, but you have right at this point, there's a lot of different groups, a lot of different things, right? So then it comes to like when we're thinking about, and this is like to kind of what to piggyback on what you just talked about, Anishka, when we're having people go back to work and we have a lot of these mandates coming down, you have the option of either getting a shot or testing. Some places that's not even an option, it's just a shot, and that's where people are being pushed into a corner, which is so unfair. But then you do have places where your option is, testing. In a way, that could be unfair because it's not necessarily, all things are not necessarily covered by your insurance. And we are at a time where people are under or not insured, right? We do have Affordable Care Act, but insurance is always, has always been an issue for people who are in underserved communities. And so if we are moving in that space where it's like, okay, well, I do have an option, right? And that's to get tested. Can I afford it, right? Not everybody will be able to afford it. So then, those people become part of the group that's pushed into a corner. Then there's like, the other piece where it's like so I'm going to go back to what you talked about. It's like, if there's natural immunity, if there's the option for exemption, why is that not part of the exemption? Because you have to have a medical exam, and it has to, and I think right now it has to be an allergy to something that is currently in the ingredients and the makeup of what is in the shot. And so, and that's fine. That makes sense. At the same time, why can't natural immunity be added to that? You would have to have a test, and a doctor would have to, would have to verify and confirm that there's natural immunity because you've had it. I see antibodies, whatever it is, whatever that marker is that they can say, okay, you'll be okay from, catching it again. And the truth is, there have been stories of people who have caught it twice and been fine and and it's, I don't want to say it's like a cold, but like they're here, Also people who are like, oh, it's just like a flu, it's okay, I'm fine. So then what happens for those people who now have it in their system and they actually are fine? They are not going to be transmitters because we know that, because the viral load is higher for those people who have received the shot, within a certain amount, their viral load is higher. So they're actually transmitting, So what do we do for those people? Why is it that they cannot also be added to a medical exemption? So you have an allergy, so here it is. And then maybe every couple of months will change because the ingredients may change based on how things evolve. Are you still allergic to what's in it? And you'll have to do that. And I think people would be fine with that. Again, still check like how your antibodies doing or whatever. Are you still immune to, the strain that has now morphed or whatever? Those are things that can be done. Will you have to check up on them, within a certain amount of time or intervals? Probably. But there are definitely ways to make broad accommodations for people who don't want it. Then at the same time, I do think that there is that group where it's like, I don't want to wear a mask. And so before we even get to that part, I thought I saw like some mics of you. So if there's somebody that wants to say something before we get to that part, because I do have some thoughts about that. And because I think that is the part that's a little bit selfish. But anybody has something?
I just want to quickly just add on to the whole natural immunity testing for that. So the difficulty with that, and it's a lot more complicated than just testing for antibodies. So some people will have, still have antibodies within this, the immune system, and they can be detected. But now what's coming to the forefront, and a lot more research is being done on this, is the importance of T cells. And being able to test for those, because people who have a higher, more robust immune response tends to have, detectable T cells, which indicate, and the thing is, you have to also bear in mind that currently there's no, I think it's the antibody testing that's done routinely, but not so much. People don't test for T cells. I think you have to pay for that privately. So there's that aspect to consider. Then you've also got the fact that some people that are immune are not necessarily going to test positive for antibodies, and that doesn't mean they're still not immune. So there's a lot of complexity when it comes to this, and I think we really need to kind of, people need to really understand this. We need to kind of accommodate for such nuance when it comes to testing for natural immunity.
And I wanted to just jump in really quickly, and I'm glad that you acknowledged that. For some, they're kind of between the mandated vaccination or weekly testing. Now, what I wanted to just touch on with the weekly testing, which is primarily PCR testing, is what my understanding is, or the nasal pharyngeal testing, right?
Yeah.
How is that impacting your nasal cavity or compromising your immune system, your inner ear, and even your ability to fight off infection when you're subjecting yourself to a weekly test? My children had to travel. My children traveled out of the country during this time, and they had to receive PCR tests. And I'll say for my son, it was extremely traumatic, and he had respiratory problems thereafter. And so I'm just like, even for those, how is that? That's just to make you so uncomfortable that you concede. Yes, it's like, okay, if you don't want to do this, then you know what, you'll be subjected to this. Just something to consider. Like, look up what the implications are. And there are studies, I've been looking at a few of them, that are beginning to kind of examine what the implications are of exposing yourself to weekly testing. Yeah, just another thing to think about. I do know that I do see on YouTube that there's quite a bit of a chit chat. I don't know if you noticed that, but there seems to be a lot of comments happening.
Yes, I did. I was like, I'm gonna get to the
Okay.
but I was like, we have so much to say. So, a lot of it has been like, very in agreement with what we're saying, Kashia had, said, talked about like the response being like very impulsive and aggressive. And I think I would agree with that. I see that. And which is upsetting and disheartening, right? Because we're supposed to be researchers and scientists and rely on the evidence and not just fear. And I think people would say like, well, we are relying on research. But the other thing is like, this is so new for us. Again, like we haven't seen something like this since 1918. All of us who are alive right now, this is not our reality. This was not our reality. This is something that like people, we have maybe some centenarians who may remember this, but they were children when this happened the last time. So the research is changing every day. So when we're saying like, well, this is the research and it's showing this, it's shifting daily. So to, create mandates and policies based on something that is shifting daily is it can be a little bit dangerous. And I find it, very, it's upsetting, for that to be happening in the realm of public health. We're supposed to be a little bit more level-headed than that. And then she says, like, when you're faced with a decision, talking about people who are kind of being backed into a corner, when you're faced with a decision so quickly, there's a panic, especially knowing the medical history of this nation with their medical treatments and injections. Because the first thing that I think of, I'm like, well, especially when we're talking about people of color, it's Tuskegee. And it's like, well, we already know what you did back then, like, and some of it you're still doing, because even after Tuskegee, there was eugenics, you know? So it's like, these are not things that people are unfamiliar with. I will say there's probably a whole lot of people who don't remember, because what happens is, a lot of the times, because there's so many distractions, we have YouTube, we have TV, and people, you know, have short memories, because things are constantly being thrown in our face. We've experienced so far, like throughout this whole, you know, these last, what has it been, like 20 months? There's been like several wars, conflicts. We have all these natural disasters popping up. So there's been so much kind of thrown at us. There's like, where do you turn first? You know, there's like just nothing but confusion around. And when you're confused, you never make the right decisions, you know, because you're just in a fog. So I would agree with that. And Sham the Joy says the audacity. And Christopher Magneto says, like, you know, it's cognitive, responding to Kashia's comment, that it's cognitive dissonance at a level that's hard to fathom. The average person gets 2 to 3 lies before they're untrustworthy. The government has immunity, apparently. They can break the rules, and we, you know, still have people that trust them. And that's my point about, like, you know, when we saw things like eugenics and Tuskegee, you know, but you go back to like, well, this is what it is. And some of that, you know, to try to be fair, some of that is like, you know, the public like announcements to like, we want to be, you know, very cognitive and thoughtful about equity and cultural competency, and here's the things that we're doing to make up for that. We are, you know, going to agree publicly and say that, you know, those things that were done to certain people in the past was wrong. And you want to, you know, it's kind of like, okay, because a lot of the times, where are people going to go? This is where they live, right? So not everybody's like thinking like, well, I'm going to go somewhere else. This is where they live. This is where their life is. This is where their families are. And so people are really going to just be, you know, they want the best. And so if you're seeing these things that are saying, okay, well, we're going to try to make it better, you want to, you know, think that it's going to be better. And some of the things have been, you know, so I don't want to, you know, negate things that have, you know, maybe been beneficial for people. So then, yeah, they're going to go back. But at the same time, then we'll have something like this, and it's like, I don't know. You know, it's like, I don't know. So, because she says, like, you know, she's thinking of the children that she has yet to have. There's no solid research on the effects on the reproductive system. I do not want to risk infertility or any medical issues within the kids that I bear. And I understand that, when, you know, I'm very like sensitive to women who are, you know, being mindful of their womb. You know, I have no.
And
just
to add to that, Deirdre, they're just I think the NCI are now funding a study to look into the menstrual changes that occur. And because there's a great deal of, you know, there's a lot of talk around what's been happening in terms of that. A lot of women coming out, you know, and speaking out about, you know, the menstrual changes. And there currently is a study being undergone at the moment to kind of look into that. I think it's a year-long study. Yeah.
Okay. And you see, this is what the research is ever changing. So to mandate something where we don't have all the information, and some of this information we're not going to know until 10, 20 years down the line, until we see the children who have received it when they grow up, or children who were in utero when they, you know, when their when the mother received it. And then it's like, is there more aggression? Is there, you know, is there something we don't know? And that's not to say like, oh, we're going to see that, but we don't know. We, you know, what we do have, since we're evidence-based, is things in the past where that happened, where mothers were told, take this, and now we see issues with the children later on in life. So, you know, it's something to think about.
You know, when you mentioned the trust and the trauma component, it just reminded me how our perspective can be, you know, as limited as our geographic location. You know, yeah, there's, you know, Tuskegee, but I think as a Caribbean American, what it also took my mind to is how I always, as a child, I can identify a Caribbean person anywhere, because all you had to do was see their arms. There were vaccines sent across the globe to eradicate, I think it was smallpox and perhaps polio. And that vaccine did not cause in the United States and in other wealthy countries, the vaccine that they received did not cause scarring. It did not give a circle with a series of dots, but it did. But the vaccine that was sent to other countries did. And for a generation or two, you'll know those people by the scars that they bear. Now, that's a physical, literal. But we don't know whether the scars of the future will be physically literal or not. Um, but it also just speaks to inferior products sometimes being provided because we've got to test what works and what doesn't. Um, there's just a lot that I think can be said and should be said about how trauma is going to impact all of us. I think it's amazing that we got to touch on the stress component, because with all of this, I think we're forgetting, not us, but I think it's being forgotten how significant increased stress opens you up to disease and illness, not just mental illness, but physical illness. So I'm worrying about my job. I'm worrying about my children. I'm worried about whether they can go to school or can't go to school. I'm worried about taking this vaccine or not. I'm worried. Yet I'm supposed to be optimally healthy in order to fight off disease. It is, as someone put in the chat, cognitive dissonance to have to exist in such an environment as that. And then you're worried about whether you can even trust the powers that be who are pushing this. So we want to give a balanced perspective, but it's almost like right now what we're given is the side that's unseen, right? Because there's the light and there's the dark. And sometimes you have to kind of flip it to that dark side so that people can appreciate what that perspective is.
I think Precious, what definitely agree with what you said, and I think also just the way the messaging has been, it's just adding to the hesitancy, I think, and the lack of trust. And it's just, it's making it much harder, to the extent where I even question how many issues are going to come about because of this, and how those issues are going to set us back in terms of public health and making advancements. That so many things that we've done, I just feel are just going to be undone because of this whole experience. And just going back to, I think we've mentioned this before about the stress and how it relates to disease, but we know for a fact that stress increases the level of inflammation in the body, and inflammation is one of the first things that kind of leads on to disease development, especially when it comes to cancer. So it's an interesting kind of link, and it's something that over time, accumulation of the stress and such high levels of stress, it's worrying as to how that's going to make us more ill, more diseased as a population.
Yeah. And this a thing about stress is like, if the body is in stress mode, is in that stress response, and off and on, like too much, you like you said, you open yourself up to disease. And that's not just like, it can even affect like your brain function, because like these are all like triggered response systems. The stress is a triggered response system. It's like a defense mechanism that the body has. So if you're always in this defense mechanism, you'll get weak. This is a real thing, and I'm not explaining it in those scientific terms. I don't need to. Like, that is the truth. That is real, and we can go to like research papers, and we see that a prolonged stress response will lead to disease, physical disease, and changes in the brain. That is the truth.
Having this conversation as we're talking for this time, what stands out in my head is that this time that we have and that we've been going through this whole pandemic, really, I know for me for sure, and I know for you guys probably as well, it really makes you take a step back and reevaluate everything, every aspect of your life, from your employer or from your family dynamics, everything, to really say, like, I know I have power, like, and I need to take and step into and embrace the power that I have to determine and make these life decisions. Because when we think about it, with our jobs being on the line due to the vaccine, with all of this information and misinformation, it's like you just want to say, stop, enough. Let me take full control of what's happening here. Let me figure out what I need to do for myself and my family. Let me get it together here, because getting info from here, from there, listening to this one, that one, having someone take stay in control of my livelihood, my financial livelihood, that doesn't sit well. So it really makes you reevaluate a lot of things, like what's important, what's not. Like for me, for instance, I'm a mom, a single mom, and I have support, but I am the sole caregiver of my child. She's 16, but still, she's a mama's girl, right? And she needs me now the same way she needed me when she was 5 and 6 years old. Every 2 seconds is mom, 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 mom. But I have to really think about, you know, do I want to step out on faith and just do my own thing, because my employer is not going to work with me to with my schedule to make sure that I can take her to and from school, because I'm just like, I don't want her to get on public transportation, the subway I'm sorry, I'm getting tongue tied specifically. I have to reevaluate a lot of these things, like many parents, like just many people, like what do I want to do? How do I want to have control over my time? What do I want to focus on? How do I want to live my life going forward? And do I really want to leave my livelihood up to an organization slash a company? Rather, if I thrive or if I don't in my professional life. Like, it's so many moving pieces. It's so many things to really think about and reevaluate. And just listening to the conversation, I'm just like, wow, it's so much. Thankfully we're educated, we're aware, we're able to have this conversation. We're able to identify our options, and move around and maneuver in ways that maybe that others can't. And so it really just makes you think, like, okay, even with all the privileges that we have, we still bump into these walls. Imagine those who don't have those privileges and don't have those options. What are they going through right now, right? Um, and how do I, in the process of making it work for me, that I make it work for others too? That I show them, okay, these are possibilities. Maybe this will work for you too. Like, how do I help my community in looking at things in a different perspective, so that this doesn't bury people and bury people alive? Because I feel like that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I wanted to go over to the chat really quickly. I'm gonna like just ahead, because she says her mom has a circle scar. She got it with her, and her family was stationed overseas. And you'll see that with some people who are not Caribbean, are not from another nation. Like, they will have a circle scar based on, like, when they were born and like what the inoculation at that time was. But I agree with you, Precious. Like walking around, like, like, oh, circle scars, that means you probably weren't born here, yeah, like, they're like interesting, like, identifiers too, right? So if you're moving around, it's like very subtle ways of saying, like, someone else, from someplace else, right? So what is that doing,
That's
um
I just want to say something really quickly. I used to do that with my mom because she had one, but she had like a little dent. So we'd go around the families and look at their arms, like, let's feel the dent. And that's how you knew. Precious, when you said that, I was like, oh my God, that is so true. Everyone from the Caribbean has that. Like, so, but yeah.
I didn't actually know that, so that's a piece of knowledge that's quite, interesting.
Yeah. And look, we all know it as like an identifier. Nobody's like, oh, it's like, we know what it is, but it's like a physical way to identify you may not be from here. So, and we know that we know the history of this place. Not even history, we know the present, right? Of this place, and identifying people who are, other, and how that results in like treatment and things like that. So that's really interesting to point out. I want to skip down to something really interesting in the chat. I don't know enough about this, but I wanted to like call out the comments. So Kashia says, like, let's not forget the quote unquote get the vaccine or stay in jail rulings by judges. I was not aware of that. So that to me is
that is
Yes.
ridiculous.
do with wherever they're
Go ahead.
I don't know too much. I just know what I've seen, and I've saw clips of like judges using that as like a leverage, the vaccine. Well, if you can get off of parole X amount of years early if you take this vaccine, or you can do less time in the county jail if you take the vaccine. I don't
Yes.
understand what grounds they stand. Like, how is that okay? How is that legal? Like, you're just, yeah. I can't speak much more than what I saw because I was just so disgusted. I was like, I'm like, I don't even want to dig any deeper right now in that moment. And this was recently. But I would love to learn more about why this is even an option and why judges are able to do that.
Well, it's being used as a bargaining chip, right? The once trying to pick my words carefully here. Once it has been determined that this thing is what's necessary, you'll often see that the first to be indoctrinated are those that are identified as oh gosh, I don't have the, the vocabulary to like be crafty about this. So oftentimes those that are criminalized are the guinea pigs. I think history tells us this, right? And so what's happening at this point is it's not just those that are hospitalized, and we haven't touched on the patients, right? And unfortunately, I have limited time this afternoon, but I wanted to just say, yeah, we're focused on the employees and employers, but we haven't really touched on patients who are being pressured to take these vaccines. I'm not even going to touch on, one's capacity as it pertains to my arena. How do we even know that these patients have the capacity to consent to take the vaccine? But those that are in the criminal justice system, they have no rights. They have rights, but oftentimes those rights are you can navigate around them, and you can kind of cajole them to participate in things that they otherwise would not. Because if it's between as Sister Kashia put in the chat, it's between get your vaccine or stay in jail. It's your freedom or this vaccine. So which one do you choose? Um, yeah, so it's something to think about. And it doesn't require you to be a conspiracy theorist to kind of wonder what is so special. Why is this push happening, and why is it happening in such a systematic way? And what, as an individual and as a collective, can you do to rail against it, or can you? Right? Or can you? Or is it about, as Anushka said, reevaluating what the priorities are? Because guess what? In your early example, if 60 out of 100 employees no longer have a job, then guess what? That company no longer exists. So if that happens state by state, city by city, country by country, it sets a different reality. It sets a reality where what is the value of a dollar or a ruble or any other currency, right? What is the value then when no one has any? What becomes valuable? So I'm closing with a bunch of questions because we're talking, but you have to do the thinking for yourself,
Yeah.
and make informed decisions. So
Yeah. So like we can just like, end it there. And I think I'll just reiterate, do the research. Don't just go around like I'm not doing it. Da, da, da. Know why. Be able to have a coherent and informed reason why you're not doing it. And if some of that is like because I don't trust it, then that's fine. You can have that, but know why. And don't just be like, well, I'm not doing it, because then you just kind of sound like a peanut gallery. It is important to be able to back up the reason why, right? Especially if you are in a situation where it's like your livelihood is at stake. And if that's the case also, it's like we have to figure out how to have more agency over our bodies and our minds and how we move. And that means like we have to figure out what being a sovereign means, like what are we going to do? So that's that. then I just wanted to like quickly say, like, we're in these situations where, employers and places are making these mandates, and you have figured out a way to move in it. I will say, like, in some of the cases, it's like, if masking is part of it, and we do know that there are special masks for things, and there's only like maybe one mask that kind of does everything. But when we're talking about mental health and psyche, sometimes that helps, whether you are going to get, the shot or not, just wear the mask, because you don't want to go walk into a place and put somebody who's just doing their job in jeopardy for having to say something to you, because that is the policy. Just wear it, because by doing all that extra, you're just causing more problems, and you are causing problems for people who have valid reasons why they don't want to, get vaccinated or not. It's not hard to wear a mask. And if there are some people where it's like it is a problem, then that's fine, and you can, there's ways to explain that. But like, just like being a bully and just being really like belligerent and ignorant, like I do think that is a recipe for disaster, and making it really difficult for people who have valid reasons why they don't want to get the shot. It's making it hard for them. So we have to like really think about that. That's all I'm gonna say about that. I don't know if anybody agrees or disagrees, but like that's how I feel about it. That's my story. That's what it is. So, Ali, were you gonna say something? Okay. Like, so we are going to wrap it up. So, what if wearing a mask is making people sick? That is something that, I've heard in some places, and that's fine. But then you have to be very measured about where you go and what public spaces that you move into, right? Because there is going to be, if it's just kind of like the mandate. If this is your employer and you're kind of backed into a corner, there does have to be some like figuring out like, what are we going to do? Whether it's like, coming together as a collective and saying, this is what it is. Most of us are not here for it. But if you're going, I think, into a space where it's like, I'm the proprietor of this store, all I'm asking is that you wear a mask. Like, it's really not that hard. Or you got to have to figure out movements to do that. Like, I don't think you should put employees who are just trying to do their job in jeopardy because you want to go, because I've seen people cough all, like, that's just nasty anyway. Like, don't do that. Don't do that.
But you know what, Sister Juju, you make a really valid point. So yeah, first I want to touch on the mask making one sick. So I think what's happening in some instances, and I don't, there are different definitions for sick, but one thing to consider is when you're using a cloth mask, it's oftentimes convenient for you to kind of re-wear it, right? You may have them coordinated for your outfits, as many women do, and others. But you have to remember that you should only be wearing your mask once between cleaning, right? Between cleaning. So that's one thing. Another is you want to really try to be in an environment where you can get as much fresh air as possible. So you don't have to kind of always have your mask on. And then the third point that I wanted to make regarding the mask is those that are vaccinated, I think have a certain, like someone said, like you're super immune or you whatever, I don't know. But there's like this superiority that, I'm vaccinated and I don't need to wear my mask. And I think you really need to be informed about, is it called breakthrough infections?
Yes.
It's breaking through the vaccination. And so you want to wear your mask for your own safety and for the safety of others. So those are my three kind of touch points.
Yeah.
I think Precious, definitely, just to quickly wrap up, I'd say yes, those people, the vaccinated also need to take responsibility. It's not just, oh, I've been, vaccinated, therefore I don't need to take any precautions. It's this, again, superiority kind of thinking that's not going to get us anywhere good. Right. Also, just to touch on very quickly, I was actually reading about a specific case where a lady had undergone some sexual abuse in the past. And wearing a mask for her, that particular individual, was very traumatizing. And I think we need to be I think as a collective population, we've lost our empathy for people. We're just quick to judge, quick to kind of put people into different boxes, just for the ease, it eases our ability. We don't have to think too much about it. It's just again, coming back to it's very lazy. And I think we just need to bear this in mind, that there's some people that actually may have legitimate reasons as to why they cannot wear a mask or should be exempt from wearing a mask. So I think, just keeping in, being considerate about these people and not discriminating against them is really important. And that was something that was eye-opening for me, because I actually hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you, ladies, for all of your thoughts and input. We love to share all our ideas and opinion. We opine, and we also give factual information. And this one is just well, this is episode 20. Let's talk about what's happening. So that's what we did. So thank you, everyone in the chat, for joining us. If you are catching this after the live, thank you for watching. As always, if you can catch us at 11 a.m. on Sundays, True Health Live on YouTube. You can also catch us on True Health Live on Facebook. And if there are any topics that you want us to go over, things you're interested in, please, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. You can, so when a video is coming up, and you can put things in the chat, or you can email us at truehealthlive@gmail.com. I always try to get back to you. You can also go to deidresully.com and put things in the comments there. And we make sure that we get back to folks about different comments or thoughts that you have about the show. So with that, we're gonna close. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you in the forward. Peace, everyone.